For 100 years, MCC work has demonstrated a core tenet, sometimes visible, sometimes invisible, but always energizing MCC's efforts. That central commitment is to share God's love and compassion for all in the name of Christ. Let's turn a few pages of the past century and witness this enduring commitment undergirding MCC's ministries. In 1920, Anabaptist churches in the U.S. and Canada responded to a troubling report from the part of Russia that is now Ukraine. Stories of deprivation and starvation among Mennonites caught their attention. Accounts of people seeking to survive by eating flour made from corn stalks and corn cobs pushed empathetic people into action, and MCC emerged. Caring people quickly assembled volunteers and funding, clothing and food. An operational base developed in Constantinople, today Istanbul, Turkey. Then bureaucracy ensnared the new organization. The emerging Soviet Union enacted demands that delayed any response. People died while waiting. Enter Alvin Miller, one of MCC's first service workers. His task when he arrived in Constantinople in January 1921, get Soviet permission for MCC to offer clothing and food to beleaguered families in Russia and Ukraine. Miller probed and prodded and persuaded for nearly a year. By December 1921, the desperate cries for bread, bread, in God's name, bread, could be matched with actions. Generous hearts in U.S. and Canada responded to hungry stomachs in Russia and Ukraine, giving life to the commitment of sharing God's love and compassion for all. The response in Russia set the stage for the future work of MCC. By the 1950s, MCC development work began in earnest. MCC workers and twin sisters Ada and Ida Stolzfus settled into Hebron, Palestine. As MCC volunteers for many years, they served two equally important functions. The orphanage and school they operated opened new opportunities for countless children. Their further contribution was opening the world to many friends, neighbors, and church peers back in the United States. Words and phrases like Palestine, Arab, Muslim, occupied territory became standard vocabulary among the twins' acquaintances. Ada and Ida, through action in Palestine and education in their home communities, demonstrated God's love and compassion for all. By 1961, MCC acknowledged that the U.S. and Canada also needed the witness of the church at work. In that year, MCC established a voluntary service unit in Atlanta, Georgia. Vincent and Rose Marie Harding from Chicago became the first African-American people to serve as directors in an MCC program. There in the American South, in the 1960s, service workers, both the quiet in the land and those who had suffered centuries of oppression because the quiet in the land remained quiet, sat at the same table. There in the Mennonite house on Houston Street, the Hardings created space where black voices engaged white hearers. Volunteers in Atlanta created a conduit to the larger church in their home communities. The Hardings stretched far to embrace that conversation. They provided a solid foundation, but institutional commitment seemed to lag behind the driving vision. Nearly 60 years later, MCC continues undoing the deep insidious sins of racism and white supremacy within itself and the church. In 1982, we find children from a conservative Mennonite school trying to change the mind of the most powerful man in the world. At MCC's encouragement, the students at Linville Hill Mennonite School asked Ronald Reagan to lift the U.S. embargo on school supplies to Cambodia, then known as Kampuchea. Student Anita Howe wrote, "Mr. President, I would really like to have the kids in Cambodia learn to go to school like I do." The president changed his mind. Cambodian children benefited because others, children like themselves, strove to live up to the ideal of God's love and compassion for all. As the turn of the 21st century approached, the South American country of Colombia remained politically and socially unsettled. The Colombian Mennonite Church addressed the disruption and trauma with a strong witness for peace and justice. MCC joined this effort, supporting land claims for rural farmers in the Colombian Caribbean coast zone. Years of conflict disrupted the lives and the livelihood of farm families. Ricardo Esquivia personified that struggle for many decades. At huge personal risk, Esquivia and other community leaders strove to deliver a resounding message of God's love and compassion for all. In Honduras in 2006, Gregoria Flores Nunez discovered that striving for fairness and justice can generate opposition. She found her work with indigenous rights angered some people. They sought to eliminate her influence in these communities. This Garifuna grandmother bears the bullet wound scars testifying to her commitment to the dispossessed. Flores Nunez found safety in the U.S. She brought a resolve to help others facing the hurdles she conquered. In 2016, she joined MCC to assist asylum seekers in their process of finding safety. During her time in MCC service, she turned her trauma into a powerful force that demonstrates God's love and compassion for all. After 100 years, MCC shares blessings with people in more than 50 countries. How? By demonstrating God's love and compassion for all in the name of Christ.